Hello, everybody. Welcome to the evolution lecture. This is going to be a longer lecture than what you're used to, so we will cover it in a couple of days. Ideally, I would like to cover everything in 5 different days, or 5 different lectures at least. So maybe not 5 days in a row, but in 5 different lectures. I want you guys to understand this very well. You will be asked multiple questions about evolution and its applications on the NJ Ask. So it's important to understand, and it's going to be very important once you get into high school and take high school biology. So this is in 5 sections. The first section is the contributors to evolution, the people that put together scientific data, fact, and theories together to allow our understanding of what it is and how it affects us. Second is natural selection. Third, evidence of evolution. Because we're scientists, we always need to provide evidence for anything that we do or say. Fourth, evolution of a population. And fifth, biodiversity. So let's get into the swing of things and just get right into it. So the definition. Evolution is the change in genetic makeup of a species over time. It is the idea that descendants have changed genetically due to the inheritance of different genes, of which some have mutated from their ancestors. What does that mean? It's basically we have changed over time based on our ability to adapt. So here's a nice image of what I'm talking about. So we're humans. We're primates. Okay, we have these functionalities. We're hominoids. That's what we're classified under, and we have a common primate ancestor, millions and millions of years ago. And the reason we know about this common primate ancestor is because of something called the fossil record, which we will go into later on in this lecture. So we began with a primary ancestor, and that ancestor split into two different species based on, could be environmental conditions, could be adaptations, could be land differences. And over millions of years, this species split into two more species. So we got ourselves these prosimians, lemurs like in Zoboomafoo, and these tarsiers. Over time, we have what we know as monkeys evolving in the different species of monkeys. So we have New World, Old World, gibbons, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and eventually hominoids, or hominoids, which are us, humans. This doesn't mean that we are monkeys and, there's no difference between us and monkeys. No, it just means that every living thing has something in common with one another. And so far, we've been able to figure out that the ultimate common thing between us was a common ancestor. And over time, through adaptations, these different species have come about due to environmental conditions, due to genetic mutations. So why do we need to learn about evolution? How does it affect us? Well, do you ever think why you need to get a new flu shot every year? I mean, it's the flu. One shot should do it, right? And if you've ever taken antibiotics, well, why do doctors tell you to finish all of the antibiotic even if you feel better? Let's get into this a little bit. Well, vaccines help our bodies make antibodies. Antibodies are the good guys. They are what kill all of the pathogens or bad bacteria and viruses in our bodies. So these vaccines help our body make antibodies to fight a specific flu strain. Think of it as a flu species. But the flu virus replicates quickly and has a high rate of genetic changes or mutations. So the flu virus is constantly and very quickly adapting and changing into a different species, if you will. So the antibodies that we've developed last year were designed to combat or to destroy a specific type of species of the flu virus. But because the flu virus changes every year, we need a new vaccine every year to defeat that different species. As far as antibiotics come along, when a sick person takes antibiotics, the drugs begin to kill off the bacteria. But if treatment stops prematurely, meaning that you're too lazy to finish your antibiotics, some microbes live. And those are the strongest ones because they haven't been killed yet. They have the mutations that make them resistant to the drugs. And these survivors will multiply as they pass along their protective mutations to all of their descendants. And in this way, the bacteria evolves into a new drug-resistant strain. Currently, one of the biggest problems in the field of medicine are things called superbugs. These microbes, these bacteria, these viruses that have become so resistant or so strong that nothing we throw at them would kill them. Mainly because people do not finish their antibiotic regimens. So if you're ever put on antibiotics, finish them. And if you don't, you risk giving birth to an incredibly powerful virus that we cannot kill. Evolution is the result of genetic changes that occur in constantly changing environments. These changes in DNA can occur as a result of mutations, which are constantly being generated in a gene pool. Now, a gene pool isn't a physical pool like a swimming pool. It just means the genetic makeup of a lot of people or a lot of organisms. Variation in a species increases the likelihood that at least some members of a species will survive under changed environmental conditions. Whew, well, what does that mean? Let's take a look at this picture over here. Potatoes. I love potatoes. A lot of people love potatoes. If you don't love potatoes, I'm sure you love French fries. They're made out of potatoes. I don't know if you know this, but there are many different species of potatoes. So if I'm a farmer and I want to grow a bunch of potatoes, well, I would want to grow a diverse lot of potatoes. Well, why? Well, if I have the original crop and I have a couple different potatoes here and a blight or some kind of disease hits my farm, well, some potato species will die off. But other species will continue to live because they are not affected by whatever virus or bacteria killed off the other potatoes. However, if I planted all the same species of potato and that same blight hits, all the potatoes die and I'm left with nothing. If all human beings were the same, and let's say the flu were to come by, and that flu affected all the human beings and we could all die from that flu, well then there would be no human beings left in a couple of days. Think of something called the Black Death. Okay, you could Google that or ask your history teacher about the Black Plague or the Black Death. Terrible, terrible, terrible disease that ransacked Europe and killed millions and millions and millions of people. There are people, however, that are resistant to it and couldn't get sick from it. So if all humans were to be impacted by the Black Death, then all humans would have died. The same way as if all the potatoes were to be impacted by this blight, then they would all die. But that's not the case. Only some will, and the strong survive. So remember that. The strong survive. Survival of the fittest. Let's get into the contributors to evolution. The first contributor to evolution, as far as historical records, at least to my knowledge, is a man by the name of Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun was born in 1332 AD in Tunisia, that's North Africa. He was a historian, economist, and philosopher, and he mentioned his thoughts on the gradual change of life in his book Al-Muqaddama, or Al-Muqaddimah. Ibn Khaldun wrote a book called Al-Muqaddimah, which is basically a brief history of the world. And he shares his thoughts and writes down historical facts of everything that happened in history up until the point where he was writing his book. And in his book, under the science section, he mentions this. One should look at the world of creation. It started out from minerals and progressed in an ingenious, gradual manner to plants and animals. The animal world then widens. Its species become numerous, and, in a gradual process of creation, it finally leads to man, who is able to think and reflect. The higher stage of man is reached from the world of monkeys, in which both sagacity and perception are found, but which has not reached the stage of actual reflection and thinking. At this point, we come to the first stage of man after the world of monkeys. This is as far as our physical observation extends. Now, I know that might be pretty deep to most of you, but I'm going to offer you some extra credit. If you're to give me a response, what you think he's saying, or some kind of reflection on what Ibn Khaldun is saying about this, theory of evolution that it was later known to become, I'll give you it's extra credit. It'll count as an extra homework assignment. The extra credit will be due the day after you hear this lecture in class. So keep that in mind. It's very interesting. Mind you, 1332 AD, almost no technology around. This was more than 100 years before Christopher Columbus sailed the Atlantic and quote-unquote discovered the Americas. So this was a very, very, very long time ago. So think about that as you write your reflection. Fast forward a few hundred years, we have Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Alright, he's a French naturalist, 1809. He reasoned that species do not go extinct, but rather evolve into other species. He developed a use versus disuse theory, which states that an organism's behavior causes changes in certain structures or organs. These structures or organs become larger or smaller from use or disuse, and these changes were passed on to offspring, acquired traits, for example, the long necks of giraffes. So let's look at this picture here real quick. So Lamarck, especially for exams, you think Lamarck, you think the giraffe and the giraffe neck. So Lamarck's theory is, back in the day, there were giraffes. They had short necks. They ate just the same way giraffes eat. Some giraffes ate from shrubs. Other giraffes ate from trees. Over time, there have been genetic mutations in the giraffe that eats from trees that gave it a longer neck. That longer neck allowed it to eat from taller trees, while the short-necked giraffe still could only eat from shrubs. Now, over time, as the theory, progresses, over time, the trees got taller, and the taller trees were able to keep their leaves, while the shorter leaves died off because of drought or environmental conditions or too much competition. So those short-necked giraffes died off because they couldn't eat, and the long-necked giraffes continued to live because they could continue to eat. Here's a picture of three similar-looking creatures. Write down what the similarities are and what the differences are. Also write down what you think these creatures used to do in their day-to-day lives and why they look the way they do. And here's just, this isn't real, but this is just like, it's photoshopped, how the giraffe would have looked like before and during and after the genetic mutation. Well, the genetic mutations are always going on, but that's how we see giraffes today. Next, James Hutton. James Hutton is a Scottish geologist in the late 1700s, and he proposed the concept of gradualism. Now, this is very important. Gradualism is the process by which landforms resulted from slow changes over a long period of time. This suggested that the processes that shaped Earth in the past is still shaping Earth in the present. This is very important because gradualism means that things happen very, very slowly over time. But these are great things like the meandering, as it's called, of this river. The river flows, meanders, and cuts away and erodes solid rock over millions of years. Things are gradual. The reason this is important in evolution is that evolution is gradual. These adaptations occur over thousands, hundreds of thousands, or sometimes even millions of years. We have a man named Charles Lyell, who is an English geologist in the 1830s. He proposed the concept of uniformitarianism. Uniformitarianism. Say that 3 times fast. The geologic process or processes that shape the earth are uniform over time. So that means that everything happens the same way over time. So it's the same geologic process, it just has different effects, but it's all because of the same thing. Now, again, geologic processes drive evolution and drive adaptation. We'll go into that in more detail in a little bit. Now we have Thomas Malthus, who is an English economist in the 1800s, proposed that resources in an environment are limited. He stated that the population size of any organism will be limited by the amount of food, water, sunlight, space, and other resources. And the human population will be affected by war, disease, and famine. Nowadays, we have over 7.2 billion humans on the planet. And there is a concept in the environmental world called carrying capacity. How many people can the Earth really sustain? How many organisms, how many elephants, how many giraffes, how many hippopotamus, whatever, can their environment sustain? Until what point will these species or these populations dwindle and die off? And then how will they recover? And then how will they die off again? So that's the theory of it. I mean, he's an economist, so he's thinking about fluctuations. He's thinking about maximum profit, maximum resources, how you could feed people, how you could help people, and how you could make the most money. I mean, come on, he's an economist. That's all he really cared about. But it mattered a lot when it came to evolution. Then we have Charles Darwin. He's the flag man of the whole theory. You'll be learning a lot about him throughout your whole lives. He's a cool guy. He traveled the HMS Beagle to the Galapagos Islands in 1831 to study plant and animal life. Now, Darwin was very wealthy, so he was able to do this back then. Darwin's careful observations led him to write his book, The Origin of Species. It's a very good read. I mean, if you don't want to read the whole book, at least look up the summary. Darwin's observations showed him that there are many variations among the species of each of the islands. Variation. You should be writing this down. Differences in a physical trait. Darwin noted that the variations among the species appear to be the best suited or adapted to the environment which the organisms lived. This picture is of the Galapagos tortoise. In the region where the tortoise lives, there are tall plants. So the tortoise has a long neck. Now, it didn't get a long neck instantly, no, but over time, the tortoises that had the genetic mutation that gave them longer necks were able to survive because they could reach more food. And because they could reach more food, they can eat more and reproduce more. And their offspring can eat more and reproduce more, and that's why they're able to live. Adaptation can lead to a change in genes. Once more, adaptation can lead to a change in genes. There's a concept of Darwin's finches. Alright, let's zoom in over here. In different areas of the Galapagos live different finches, and different finches ate different things. Darwin noticed that the finches that ate mainly insects had a certain type of beak, and depending on what type of insect they ate, they had a different style beak. Although they're all finches. We have the small tree finch, ate from small trees. Medium tree finch, mediums. Large tree finch, the mangrove finch, the woodpecker finch, and so on and so forth. The seed-eating finches had bigger, tougher, meatier, quote-unquote, beaks to break the seed so they could get what's inside. The cactus seeds and cactus part finches had these very robust, thick, long beaks that wouldn't cause the finch any pain when trying to eat a cactus. I mean, if you tried to eat a cactus, it would hurt a lot because you'd have all the needles in your mouth. Then you had a vegetarian finch that doesn't have a very sharp or pointy beak because it's not trying to kill anything, but it has a rather large beak that's powerful that allows it to eat different vegetables. In 1858, so remember Darwin went to the Galapagos in 1831. In 1858, Darwin and Alfred Wallace presented their theory of evolution. And one of the newest concepts in that theory was the concept of natural selection. Okay, natural selection. Natural selection in a nutshell. You know, the three crows, yum, green beetles, our favorite. What do you think is going to happen to the population of green beetles if all of these crows only eat green beetles? What will happen to the population of green beetles, and what will happen to the population of brown beetles? And in 500 years, will the green beetles still exist? Will the ground beetles still exist? Or the brown beetles still exist? And will there be more brown beetles or more green beetles? And this is a little funny comic. So like with deer, it's basically if you're a male deer and you have large antlers, you know, you'll get a mate. So this is a female deer, and she sees a male deer with these ridiculously exaggerated antlers, and she's just telling him, it's not you, it's natural selection, you know? Instead of it's not you, it's me. It's probably funnier to me than it is to you. Whew, alright. We have covered 2 of the 5 subsections so far. Let's get into the subsection number 3. Alright, so natural selection is the survival and reproduction of those organisms best adapted to their surroundings. This is fitness. Okay, fitness. Like I said earlier, survival of the fittest. A common example is of the peppered moths before and after the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution produced a lot of smoke, a lot of smog, a lot of tar, and basically painted everything black with soot. If I were a dark moth, I am camouflaged in the soot and things cannot eat me. If I am a light moth, I cannot camouflage in the soot and I stand out like a sore thumb and I'm going to get eaten a lot. So over time, the population of light moths dwindled and the population of dark moths increased. There are 4 principles of natural selection. They are variation within a population is the basis for natural selection. Those with a higher fitness tend to produce many offspring that must compete. Advantages arise in a species when variation makes certain members more adaptive to survive. And future offspring will have traits different from the original ancestor, descent with modification, as long as the environment is favorable for that trait. Now here are the rules for the natural selection. Overproduction. Each species produces more offspring than can survive. Those who are best adapted leave more offspring than those who are not. Struggle for existence. The offspring of each generation must compete for food, water, shelter. Those who do not compete well will die. And variation. The offspring of each generation are not exactly alike. Differences in traits are called variations. And finally, survival of the fittest. The organisms that are most likely to survive will reproduce. Those who are not likely to survive do not pass on their genes. And just like with the example of the dark moth and the light moth, the environmental influences are very important and very important to understand. Natural selection acts on the phenotype of an organism rather than the genotype. Think about, once more, the dark moth and the light moth. A change in the environment shows that different traits become more favorable. As soon as traits are eliminated from the gene pool, other, more favorable traits are increased, thus changing the overall look of the organism. Evidence. Evidence, evidence, evidence. We are scientists, and evidence is the most important thing. If you speak without evidence, you lose your reputation. A theory is a well-supported, testable explanation of phenomena that have occurred in the natural world. Evolution is an attempt to account for all the diversity of life. Scientific facts, observations, and hypotheses all make up the theory of evolution. Evolution is supported by a wide array of scientific evidence. If any of this evidence was proven wrong, the theory of evolution must be modified. So there's anatomical evolution, anatomy. Our bone structures kind of look the same, and it's pretty weird. And by weird, I mean awesome and interesting. We have a human's arm, a cat's foreleg, a whale's flipper, and a bat wing. It all looks very similar. They are homologous structures. Structures, let's get back to the definition there. When different species have similar body parts and structures, we say they are homologous. So we have the human arm, we have our 5 fingers, we have these phalanges, we have a wrist, we have the radius and the ulna and the humerus. Cats have a humerus, a radius and ulna, very similar looking, the wrist joint, and we have the phalanges. Whales, believe it or not, under those fins, they got bones. They have a humerus, the radius, the ulna, the carpal, metacarp, and just everything. Bats, same deal. They have these skeletons, and it's really, really amazing. Analogous structures show how organisms develop structures that are structurally different, but can be used for the same purpose. Example are the many, many types of wings in the animal kingdom. We have an insect wing, a bird wing, and a bat wing. The whole purpose for these wings are so the animals can fly, but they are structurally different. So that means that these wings have adapted to specific environments, specific niches, specific predator-prey relationships. So here, one more time, analogous structures. We have a shark. This is the happiest looking shark I think I've ever seen. A penguin and a dolphin. So we have a fish, a bird, and a mammal that all have similar streamlined appendages. We have homologous structures, so like the human, the cat, the whale, and the bat. Next, we have something called vestigial structures. Vestigial structures are when organisms have a body part that seems to not have any function at all. Call it vestigial. Maybe it had an ancient function. It could have been for some reason. So in humans, we have a tailbone, believe it or not. So we don't have tails, but we have a tailbone. So that means at one point we probably had tails. And we have the appendix. The appendix, the appendix is a small part that kind of just comes off of our large intestine, and some people get it removed. Sometimes it gets really inflamed or it explodes in the body and you have to get it removed surgically. Whales and crobas have vestigial hind legs, meaning a distant ancestor may have once walked on land. So whales just have these leg bones. There are no legs, but they have the leg bones. So, hey, imagine if whales walked on land. That would be scary and amazing at the same time. I wonder if they would make good pets. So the tailbone. Okay, Grandpa didn't have a tail, or neither did your great-grandpa or your great-great-grandpa. But if you go back far enough in the family tree, your ancestors did. Other mammals find their tails useful for balance, but when humans learned to walk, the tail became useless, and evolution converted it to just some fused vertebrae we call the coccyx. Then we have erector pili and body hair. Animals, when they get scared, they puff up or they raise their hair like a cat raises its hair, and that's to make you look bigger and more intimidating. So it's an It's an evolutionary adaptation. So when we get scared and our hair stands up, it's because typically, back in the day, if you got scared, it's because something's trying to kill you. And if that something trying to kill you sees that you're bigger or you're getting bigger or you're bigger than it, it's probably going to not want to kill you anymore. So with that said, brainstorm. Appendix and wisdom teeth. Why do we have them? Think about it. So we have a chemical evolution of, chemical proof, chemical evidence of evolution. Chimpanzees are 99.5% related to human beings. A mouse is 88% related to human beings, which is why we use them for a lot of experiments. Chickens are 75% related to human beings. Fruit flies are 60% related to human beings. And fun fact, bananas are 50%. Fossils are the imprints or remains of plants or animals. Fossils in older layers are more primitive than those in younger layers. Fossils are more likely to form from bones or other hard materials. That means that we're less likely to have a jellyfish fossil than a fish fossil, because jellyfish have no bones and fish do have bones. Fossils help scientists trace the evolution of many organisms over time, and the fossil record is the biological record of time on Earth. The oldest rocks have the oldest fossils, the youngest rock have the youngest fossils. And with that said, that means that we can see that an animal 60 million years ago, like the Eohippus, we have a tooth fossil and a foreleg fossil. It was a very small horse-like animal 60 million years ago. 40 million years ago, the Miohippus, and we have a tooth fossil and a foreleg fossil. Looks like it got a little bit bigger, but it's still like a horse-like animal. 25 million years ago, we got the Merychippus, longer, bigger animal, similar tooth, similar foreleg. 7 million years ago, we had the Pleohippus, another horse-like animal with a similar tooth and a similar foreleg. And 3 million years ago, we have what we know as the modern horse, the Equus, or the Equus. It's similar tooth, similar foreleg. So over time, through genetic mutation, through different environmental factors, through different adaptations, this Eohippus evolved into the modern horse. So let's be scientists. Here's a fun activity for us to do. Can we hypothesize a story about these turtles? So these are all turtle shells. Can we hypothesize a story about these turtles? Human skull evolution. This is where everyone gets really upset. Oh, humans didn't evolve, blah, 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 blah. Whatever. Hey, we have the fossil record. We apply it to different animals. We could apply it to humans. There's this study called anthropology. It's the study of man, mankind, cultures, everything. And we have different human species, quote unquote. We have ancient humans. We have the Australopithecines between 400 and 530 BC. We have Homo erectus, which has a higher brain capacity. We have Homo sapiens, that's us, between 1200 and 1600. So if we compare the different skull sizes, the earliest humans had pretty small skulls. The Homo erectus, these are the guys who figured out how to walk upright. That's quite large. The embryos, and eventually, they hatch or they were born, and we get, that species. But it's so interesting how similar they are, and that really kind of gives you like, oh, hey, maybe we did come from a common ancestor. Embryology is the study of developing organisms. Scientists compare the embryos of different species to see how closely related they are. And the embryos of vertebrates are very similar in the early stages of development. Vertebrates, we have backbones. That's what that means. So that's just another picture. It's very, very, very cool. Then we have a geographical. So we have all these different types of salamanders, but depending on where they live, they've evolved to have different colors, different length of legs, different diets, different abilities. Just like we spoke about with the tortoises and how long their necks are, and the finches and what their how long or broad or whatever their beaks are. Wherever you live will determine, how you'll look or what you need to adapt to, and then how fit you need to be to survive. So look at that. This is why I look at that. That's really interesting. So that means that it goes deep into whatever tree or flower that it gets its food from. And that's why we have different animals in different places. Here we go. Evolution of a population. The genetic variation in a population increases the chance that some individuals will survive. Genetic variation leads to phenotypic variations of physical. Phenotypic variation is necessary for natural selection, and genetic variation is stored in a population's gene pool, which is made up of alleles, and allele combos form when organisms reproduce, as we've gone over in the genetics lecture. So we have different mutations and allele frequencies, and we have hybridization, which is the crossing of two different species. That occurs when individuals can't find a mate of their own species. And, humans, we've actually forced that upon two different species. We mated a lion with a tiger, and we got something we call ligers. Ligers are giant, like 9 feet long, massively powerful, but they can't reproduce. It's pretty incredible. Natural selection determines which individuals will survive and which will be eliminated. Natural selection can change the distribution of a trait. Favorable phenotypes will provide higher fitness for individuals. Alleles associate with favorable phenotypes increase in frequency. Alleles associated with unfavorable phenotypes decrease in frequency. So if you have favorable phenotypes, then you will be able to reproduce, and those alleles will continue in the gene pool. If you have unfavorable phenotypes, you will not be able to reproduce, and those alleles will no longer be in the gene pool. So we have something called directional selection. So when certain phenotypes can be more favorable than another, like in the peppered moths example, the white moth and the black moth during the Industrial Revolution. So when trees changed color, the black moth became better suited to survive, and the black moths became the favorable allele. So the population moved towards the darker, meaning that more black moths were able to reproduce. Another process called stabilizing selection, a process where the heterozygous alleles are more favorable than either homozygous alleles. So sometimes it's not just, I want to be completely dominant or completely recessive. Sometimes you want a little bit of both. You want to be a carrier. The resulting populations contain higher frequencies of the heterozygous individuals, but this reduces genetic diversity in the population because eventually you're going to have many offspring with the same type of alleles because you're just doing heterozygous. So the homozygous will either die off or they'll end up dominating. And we have disruptive selection. The homozygous alleles are both favored over the heterozygous alleles. The heterozygous allele is removed from the population completely due to low fitness, and a new species may form. The population by the elimination of the intermediate phenotype. So you might have, typically we have this bell curve, all right? But when there's no heterozygous, you only have the recessive species and the dominant species, the recessive alleles and the dominant alleles, and they might just end up forming two completely different species, and that's how that works. Here's another example. Let's take a minute, check that out, and see if you could make any sense of it. There's something called relative frequency. Don't worry too much about this. It goes above and beyond what you need to know for any exam, my exam, or any standardized exam. Genetic drift occurs when there is a change in gene frequency. So basically, there is a decrease in genetic diversity of a population when genetic drift occurs. And two things can cause that: the bottleneck effect, which is the reduction of number of organisms, massive disease, pollution, earthquake, volcano, that something like that, and the founder effect, the migration of a few individuals to a new area. If you settle on some new land and there's no competition, you're going to have a lot of offspring. Well, genetic drift causes a loss in genetic variation. Adaptation becomes a problem when alleles are fixed, and then lethal alleles can be carried by heterozygous individuals and they become more common. So it's just like there used to be yellow ladybugs and red ladybugs. The red ladybugs ended up on an island, and the entire island became full of red ladybugs. This is the bottleneck event. The original population, all of them died except a few of them. Surviving population went ahead and reproduced. Founder effect, as I stated right there. Factors that lead to evolution: small populations, gene flow, mutations, sexual selection, and natural selection. That's the gist, I guess, of the entire. So we have behavioral differences, geographic differences, timing of reproduction that contribute to speciation. So speciation results in an increase in biodiversity as new species emerge with different alleles in their populations. The more species you have, the better it is, because if like that example with the potatoes earlier, if something were to come by and were to kill a couple of the species, at least not all of them will die. Some will continue and live on, and maybe more species will come about. We have something called geographic isolation. So if you had an ancestral population of these rabbits, and a river came about, there was a flood or something, these populations may have to adapt to their conditions. So over here, that means being white with these kind of ears is advantageous, but across the river, you got to be gray with the same type of ears. If this white guy were to come here and this gray guy were to come here, they would probably die. These types of ears, these bent ears, are more advantageous over here, and these very long floppy ears are more advantageous over here. While these guys have all the same, just darker and darker, same ears, same tails. This is a different tail than each other. So it's really interesting. The smallest things can cause the biggest changes. Then we have behavioral isolation. So when it comes to courtship and mating, we have these birds. They actually have a really great mating ritual. If you want to see the video, remind me, I'll show you the video of it. Differences in courtship behavior such as dancing, vocal calls, colors, patterns determine whether closely related species mate with each other. That's a light bug. It's fun to catch them in the summer. Temporal isolation means isolated in time. So this is a mechanism that prevents species from mating because they breed at different times. These differences can be time of day, the season, or even different years. Both plants and animals may exhibit temporal isolation, even if species are closely related and live in the same habitat. So the American toads mate in early summer, and the Fowler's toad mate in late summer. So the American toad and the Fowler toad won't mate with each other because they mate at different times of the year. So we have the patterns of evolution. We have convergent evolution. Evolution that can occur when different species share similar environments, analogous structures. Divergent evolution. Evolution can occur when similar species attempt to move to different environments to avoid competition. Homologous structures. Beneficial relationships can occur as species interact with each other, and that's called coevolution. Just as I've said, so we have adaptive radiation. Speciation occurs from a common ancestor. It's called adaptive radiation. And evolution can be slow and consistent, or it can be fast with long periods of no change. Some species have not changed or evolved at all because their environments have not changed, just like the horseshoe crab. The horseshoe crab is actually over 200 million years old. We have fossils that are that old, and the horseshoe crab has not changed since. It's a living dinosaur. And there we have it. A very long, hopefully interesting lecture on evolution. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'm here to help you. I'm not here to hurt you. And I'll see you soon.